Okay. Shall I take this? What is coming? Sir. To see you a part of our panel discussion, sir.
Thank you very much.
Sir, Brigadier
Okay, nice of you.
N. Rajkumar, sir.
Ah,
The madam is there, sir.
yeah,
And we have Dr. Vinod, sir.
he's also
Dr.
on.
Vinod Joshi, sir.
Yeah.
He is a director, Zix,
Yeah.
and he will be.
Namaste.
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Namaste. Good morning. Good morning, VC sir. And
Namaste.
congrats for getting into Indian Army. Jai Hind.
Thank you. Yeah,
And sir,
please.
we have a madam here, our principal, and she joined with great pleasure. And also hearty welcome to you people, sir. And sir, we also have an ambassador, sir, former ambassador, Smita Purushottam and Philip Nobel from Germany.
Okay, namaste.
He is a mediator and he is developing media, sir. He is
Okay.
also motivating the young scholar. Madam is the one who is sharing the chairing and also who is the chairperson for Sitara. And she is motivating the young scholars, and she is the one who has taken India as an international player.
Very good.
And it's a great moment for us to have these dignitaries for our international panel discussion, sir. Sir, shall we start the formal?
Yeah, sure, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Sir, hearty welcome to you, sir. Hello, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Today we have an international panel discussion on Russia and Ukraine crisis. Tight rope for Indian diplomacy. As we know, it's the right time and it's very tough time for India to take in a stand towards any crisis. And I thought it's the right time to have an international panel discussion on this issue so that our young minds and young scholars get a spark to think about that, and they can get into the world politics and global politics. As we know, India is firmly believing in the neutrality principle, and it's very tough time to take a decision, firm stand towards any country, sir. We need to get into world politics, and India, as it is developing and leading role in the global politics, it's very diplomatically has to maintain relations with that. In keeping all these points in the view, we plan to organize the international panel discussion on this issue, sir. And I take the opportunity to introduce our Honorable Vice Chancellor for our international panel discussion. And sir is one who is successfully running the MOU with other countries like China, European Union Education Council, and many other countries. He is also successfully running and also successfully designing many more programs. He is a great supporter for us to have such a great event in our college. And sir, thank you and hearty welcome to you, sir.
Thank
We
you.
need your cooperation
Thank
to
you.
have many more such events, sir. And now I feel very happy to welcome our beloved principal for welcome, and she is a great supportive and also great cooperative to have this event on this right time. Sir, Madam, it's a great moment to welcome you and thank you, and to good to see you in this event. And also, I move on to our panelist and work, Dr. Vinod Singh. He is a great event, he is a great personality, and also he holds a major role in this event. And he is a moderator, and also since the day one, he is supporting us, sir. And he is a great supportive and even dynamic also. He holds many more projects, sir, on One Belt and One Road Institute, China, from Beijing. And it's a great moment. It's a very dynamic. He is engaged only. He is working for many more countries, and he is also busy with actively busy with translating many Chinese articles and books. It is a great moment for us to have Dr. Vinod Singh as a partner, and also we have I hope to have many more such events from the BRICS. Sir also promised us we will have many more such events in future. He is also ready to involve our student in his events. And madam, it's a very great honor to have and to see you in our panel discussion. It's a great moment for us. Madam, former Ambassador Smita Purushottam, she is a great, already as I told you, she is a great personality, she is a motivator, and she is taking our India in an international level. Madam, hearty welcome to you. And I will move on Philip Novel, who is a moderator, who is a great reader, and also he is having 25 years of experience in media and developing media, and he is also motivating the youngsters in the global media. Sir, it is also a great moment to have you in this panel of discussion. And lastly, and it's a great, and I feel very proud to have a Brigadier N. Rajkumar, who is believing in fire and forget. And it's the right time to have such a brigadier for our panel discussion. Sir, you are also most welcome to all. I hope many, these findings and outcomes of panel of discussion, it will motivate and spark the young minds to get into the world politics, and they will also become very able to take a decision in politics. What will be the Indian strategy in the global politics, what to do. And it's already, as I told you people, it's a great moment, and it's a tough time for India to take a stand with any countries, because we need to have a good relations with all the countries. With this, I hope we will have a good moment, and also I hope all the youngsters will have benefited from this event. Sir, thank you, sir. Now I will leave the platform to Dr. Vinod sir to request our Vice Chancellor to deliver the keynote address, sir.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's a great weather. It's a great weather in Mysuru. Yesterday it was raining, right?
Little.
Yes. But at the same time, people in another continent, that is Europe, they are fighting for their lives and they are seeking shelters. And India, as one of the biggest country, cannot ignore this topic. So it's a great pleasure that University of Mysore has taken this initiative to discuss and focus on a topic which is very dear to humanity. And that's why at the very outset, I think the credit goes to the Vice Chancellor himself, who is leading the university to become a global one, because I was told that there are, I think, more than 100 students from different parts of the world. And I hope they have joined us on Zoom link. So the background of this conference is very clear, that we have to, today, one of the best line I got on my Twitter line is that India got independence in 1947, but for the first time, Indian foreign policy got independence in 2022. India can take a stand. India can say no to be bullied by some big powers. And today, India is really talking first time in clear words, without mincing any diplomatic words, is that it's about India's national interests. So, sir, the role of academic is very important. We need to create some more expert on foreign policy, like Mr. Jaishankar, like Madam Smita Purushottam. I'm really sorry that Madam is not keeping very, healthy. Otherwise, she's so active that she was our next foreign minister. But due to health reason, she decided to take leave. Yes, she decided to take leave, and her focus is not on foreign policy, but how to make India indigenous defense and research, self-dependent. So the concept of Atmanirbhar, which we are doing it politically, she has been doing academically for the last 20 years. And I was lucky to read her articles from Harvard and from different parts of India. She speaks Russian, she speaks Chinese, and she has been working in different parts of the world. So I'm not going to take this opportunity of my students and colleagues to, speak more politically, but I think she will be speaking more scientifically. But as the protocol says, before we start our main discussion, we have the honor to invite the most honorable and dynamic and also very patriotic and very global Vice Chancellor of the University of Mysore, who has more collaborations with China than mine without speaking the language itself, So this is something I understand, that language is not enough. We need to have leadership. We need to have that skill where to connect the link between universities, industries, and our diplomat. So VC sir, the dais is yours. Please guide us, bless us, how Department of IR can lead in future to work together with countries like China, Russia, and including the United States. Please guide us, because we are all young scholars here, and we are not sure whether India should choose a side. We should go with the United States for our information technology, or should we go with Russia for our arms and security needed? This is a very dilemma and very delicate situation for us. And your experience and your knowledge of dealing with different countries will help us. How do we choose a tightrope as the topic of the conference today between Russia, between Europe, and between United States? This is the topic today, sir. And your few words will really help us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good morning to you all. Elrigu namaskara. This is day where international panel discussion, where Russia and Ukraine crisis, the tight rope for Indian diplomacy. So which has been organized by Department of International Relations, Maharaja College, University of Mysore, in association of the BRICS Institute, India. So I formally inaugurate this very happily, because this type of discussions are required. This type of discussions are required, especially in our young minds and young peoples, where the decisions are to be taken. As here we have got Professor Anita Vimala Braggs, who is the principal of our Maharaja College, Dr. Bharati Hiremat, and Brigadier in Rajkumar, who are all here. And I heard about Smita Purushottam, the retired ambassador and the chairperson of Sitara. I heard very good words by Binod Singh now. Thank you very much, and congratulations to you on all the hard work that you have taken. And Philip Nobel, who is the editor of Media Trainer and a regional expert from Berlin. And also we have Dr. Binod Singh, who is enthusiastically what we call needs this discussion to reach all our youngsters. Again, congratulations to you, sir. And also all the different research scholars and teachers who are joined on the Zoom link, and media persons. So I'm very happy to be here, because international relations is one of the topic. Normally it is just what we call a topic and one course, and really Maharaja College one department is doing well about organizing the various seminars where the real things are to be understood by our students, and also what is the tough time that we are facing. So this panel discussion is most relevant and evolving today's context of the geopolitical pragmatism. The world is at the critical juncture. We are entering a new divided world order, presenting new challenges for the Indian diplomacy and also foreign policy. We are in new Cold War, and it will not bring the wrong in its one states, but a new era for the geopolitical pragmatism has begun. Over the last months, Russia seized the key Ukraine cities, while the citizens are fleeing to Poland and also Poland, Romania, and also Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and also Moldova. And the crisis has been sparked many questions about the history, culture, and the politics of the conflict between the two nations. The Russian President Putin's action was raised numerous questions about the objectives of his declared special military operations and his long-term vision for the Russia and its relations with the rest of the world. This military action has led a, a renewed unity among what we call the Western alliance. There is a clear desire of India to maintain the non-aligned position and retail in its strategic autonomy. But if one reads between the lines, there is also an understanding that India policy has structurally shifted towards a closer partnership with the West over the time. Russia and Ukraine crisis has exposed the limit of the Indian strategic independence, and India has ambivalence towards what we call the ambivalence towards Russians' aggressions and contradicts its own security and strategy. Russia is a valued partner in the areas of the nuclear energy, hydrocarbons, space, etc., while there is sense of appreciation for the historical relationship with Russia. There is also significant concern about the deepened Moscow-Beijing partnership, and India has increased its involvement in Quad grouping with the US, Australia, and Japan. And on the other side, India has extended military cooperation with Russia, agreeing to jointly develop and produce the military technologies and weapons over the next decade. This crisis is testing India to choose between the upholding universal values versus the pursuing national interests. The choice India must make will largely impact on Washington's Indo-Pacific strategy, and also this is not only defining the moment for the Europe and any other part of the world, but also defining the moment for the relationship among all the countries in the world. Today, the esteemed panelists will discuss the complexity of the crisis and its implications in the years to come, energy, supply chain, automobile, oil prices, and some of the key areas would derive future of the crisis. Hopefully, we can have the effective, insightful discussion contemplating patterns in the crisis, how it will alter the power system of the world. So this is what I wanted to tell some of the few points. So these panelists are the experts in the international relations, and they know what we call the total thing. I'm a computer science professor basically, so I was handling what we call computer science since almost 20 years. So since last 3 years, I'm into administration. And as our Binod Singh told about, we have got a lot of international relationship. We have got the Chinese courses since almost 2008. Since 2 years, we could not run because of our what we call the COVID crisis and visa issues and all. All the students are there and they are just coming online, and we are trying with the embassy and all. So these are all more than 800 international students are there in our what we call campus with 48 countries. So when the Afghan problem occurs, 42 students were here. So we all supported them. Even today, though their courses are completed, we have given some other seat and somehow they are managing. So like this, our University of Mysore is handling the international relationship with international students. So I think today's discussion will definitely throw the light, especially to all our international relations students, and also this panel discussions, what is going to have, let it enlighten our students and also spark the thinking about the crisis which is is being happening. Thank you very much. I congratulate Madam Bharati Hiremet for organizing this, and I congratulate Professor Anita Vimla Braggs, who is the principal, who is leading this what we call international panel discussion. Thank you very much. All done, madam. Sir, you are muted, unmuted.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chancellor. And in a very short time, you have set the agenda for discussion that in the last few years, India has definitely gone a little closer to the Western powers, especially United States. And we were talking about Indo-Pacific and Quad. But now facing this situation of Russian aggression, it's a very difficult time for us to choose one side or another. So in this condition today, rightly, we have experts from our foreign policy making and from European countries to discuss what will be the balanced approach for India to choose. And sir, as you said, under your leadership, there are already 800 students from different countries, including China and Afghanistan and different countries. I hope in future you can also host students from Ukraine as they are looking for new places to shelter. So definitely we will link up with your university and pass on the message to them. This is a great time, and your university and your leadership is doing excellent work. So due to time, allow me to thank you on behalf of the BRICS Institute and also on behalf of the whole panel here, that you could manage our time and physically are here in your presence to guide us. This is something amazing. This shows that India is serious. Our academia is serious about the rise of India and what role India can play in solving the global crisis. So we really congratulate you for helping us to organize this conference, sir. Thank you for your blessings.
Thank you.
And please join me to thank Honorable BC, sir. Thank you so much. Please.
Thank you.
And without further ado, allow me to invite our principal, Madam Anita, Madam, as she is taking all the precautions of COVID, as COVID is still not over and Shanghai is in complete lockdown. So we learned from you, Madam, and for this, audience, if you can remove the mask and please say a few words, how Maharaja College is helping us to, study political science and study about European politics, studying about, India in the emerging global world order. Few lines from you, Madam. Welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you. Honorable Vice Chancellor of the University of Mysore, Professor Hemant Kumar, Ms. Smita Pushpati, Mr. Philip Nobel, Dr. Vinod Singh, Brigadier M. Rajkumar, Dr. Bharati Hiremet, my colleagues and students, and all those listening in, namaste. It is a proud moment for us that the Department of International Relations, Maharaja's College, a constituent college of the University of Mysore, in association with BRICS Institute, India, has organized a panel discussion on Russia-Ukraine crisis, tightrope for Indian democracy. Russia's war on Ukraine is a historic watershed with political, economic, and strategic implications for the entire world. Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Monday had a virtual meeting with the US President and expressed concern over the situation in Ukraine, where Russia launched a special military operation on February 24 last. The virtual meeting between the two leaders took place as India and the United States started making efforts to narrow their differences over the Russia-Ukraine conflict. In his opening remarks, the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, particularly expressed concern over the killing of civilians at Bucha. India evacuated nearly 20,000 of its citizens, mostly students, from the war zones of Ukraine. The Prime Minister also referred to India's humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. The Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, stuck to India's policy of avoiding direct criticism of Russia for its aggressions against Ukraine. One of the primary reasons behind India standing its neutral ground is the relationship with Russia. For decades now, both countries have stood by each other on several occasions. Hindustan Times quotes India's reason, I quote, "We have kept space for diplomacy and dialogue." I have no doubt that the deliberations will be fruitful and eye-opening, not only for our students, but to everyone listening in. To have as our panelists Ms. Smita Purushottam, former ambassador and chairperson, Sitara, Mr. Philip Nobel, editor, media trainer, and regional expert from Berlin, joined by Dr. Binod Singh, director, BRICS Institute, India, and Brigadier N. Rajkumar, coordinated by Dr. Bharati Hiremat, is indeed a proud moment. I'm sure it will be very fruitful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much for your excellent and very brief remark. And without your support, today we could not have excellent discussion panel. And ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of BRICS, which is right now, this time China is the host country, and the Chinese foreign minister had come to India to invite our prime minister, to which we are not sure whether prime minister will attend the meeting or not. So India is part of various forums, including this BRICS. And at the same time, India is a very important member of the United Nations. And also we are very concerned about, human rights and so-called genocide, which is being alleged in the Ukraine right now. So these are the topics which I think I'm a non-expert, I'm not qualified to say much, but as a student of international relations, these words are too big for us. What is genocide? How can you define genocide? Who is a war criminal? This is not something very easy words we can use in discussion. But someone who is very qualified and who has served whole life to put India's position right in different countries on different platforms. And today, luckily, she had agreed to give us her 10 minutes of time to guide us and tell us whether India has, done excellent, or India is very cautious, or what India should do to make it very clear that what's happening in Ukraine or between Ukraine and Russia is not acceptable to India. So before I give the dais to Honorable Ambassador, I will ask one of my students, her name is Pinal, because we need a formal introduction of ma'am, because most of our students, they are, girls, they are very inspired by the madam's achievement. And in this forum, I take just 2-3 minutes to introduce madam's achievement and her profile in very brief. So can I request Pinal Trivedi to please give us a brief introduction about, we want to know better Smita ma'am. Can you please start? Thank you so much. Please unmute Smita. Thank you. Please unmute Pinal Trivedi. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving me this opportunity. I'll take this opportunity to welcome our next panelist, Ms. Smita Purushottam ma'am. Ma'am is the founder of the non-profit think tank Sitara, a science indigenous technology and advanced research accelerator to promote the scientific spirit and to build a science nation in India. Ma'am has served as ambassador to countries like Venezuela, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and the Holy See. In Switzerland, concrete progress was achieved on black money and Swiss support for India's NSG candidature. Several investment commitments from high-tech Swiss firms were received during her tenure. Ma'am has also served in India's mission abroad in Paris, Berlin, London, Beijing, Brussels, and Moscow. Ma'am has also served on the Soviet for Russian, SAARC, Bhutan, and other desks in the Ministry of External Affairs. Ma'am has made unique contributions in her assignments. In China, I had the opportunity to study Chinese economic reforms firsthand, which she relayed back to India. As she spent a year as fellow at Harvard University, she prepared a paper, Can India Overtake China, in the year 2001, in which she compared the two economies and predicted the success of the ongoing telecom sector reforms in India. Ma'am has done her graduation from the University of Delhi and has also attended courses at National Defense University, workshop on the relationship between national security and technology in China at the University of California, San Diego.
Ma'am attended the High Performance Leadership course at IMD Lausanne. Ma'am joined the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, that is IDSA, in New Delhi in the year 2010 as Senior Fellow, where she launched the High Tech Defense Innovation Forum in the year 2011. Ma'am is skilled in forecasting, public speaking, management, writing, and leadership. Ma'am has been published in newspapers and journals in India and abroad. Ma'am, I feel so honored to welcome you. The platform is all yours. Thank you.
You are muted. Okay. Should I begin? Oh.
Yes, ma'am. The platform is yours. Just before you begin, just want to say that you're all in one, ma'am. Different disciplines, different areas, you know. How much GB you have the storage in your brain, ma'am? How much GB? We just want to know. This is amazing.
You are so kind, and I'm absolutely overwhelmed, and you have in fact overpraised me. I do not speak Chinese. I'm not foreign minister material, but it's just very generous and kind. It reflects your generous personality. And I'm very honored to be here at the Mysore University. And for the first time, a vice chancellor of such a prestigious university has actually attended the inauguration, which is and made such profound remarks and introduction. So I'm very grateful to all of you, to Professor Kumar, to Professor Braggs, to Professor Binod Singh, and Professor Hiremath, Professor Nubel, whose views would be really interesting to hear, because I recently had a chat with a German colleague, a former German colleague, and he was really passionate about the issue, and I understood where it's coming from, since they are just next door. I'm also so delighted to meet the students, although e-meet, but still meet students, because I've tried to take another message across universities, and always met with a very positive response. So sorry for that long introduction, but I wanted to emphasize how honored and happy I am to be here. So, we have to take a more dispassionate view of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. We have to see it from the point of view of our national interest, which you also have emphasized. There is saturation coverage in the Western media of the crisis, but when you compare it to, and I'm quoting Western reports on this only, when you compare it to the coverage that the crisis, for example, in Iraq or Syria or Libya have received in Western media, it's a fraction of what the media is covering on the Ukraine, which is understandable. It's next to them, but definitely, therefore, it enjoins upon us to take a more, dispassionate view, as I said, about this whole issue. If you can just show the map, because it's in the next slide, because a little understanding of students would be very useful. It's just the next slide on this. Okay, I'll just describe it. Perhaps you can see it in that little corner. This is Ukraine. Russia is bordering it here, and the areas right now in contention are east. That is, you'll be familiar with these regions, the Donetsk and Luhansk republics, and also Crimea and Sevastopol here, which are on the Black Sea. This is the Azov Sea. All this is useful to know when we try to understand the contours of this entire crisis. Now that we've looked at the geography, I think it would be useful to just also now go into very recent history, because the Russian action is not completely out of the blue. They have been warning about their security concerns about this region for a long time, and just wanted to go into that very briefly. So, as you know, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed and Ukraine became independent, along, in fact, with Russia and many other ex-Soviet republics. But unfortunately, there was a lot of political turmoil in the Ukraine, mainly between the more Russian ethnic groups and the Ukrainian groups. And this culminated, unfortunately, in disagreement over Ukraine's direction, whether it would join the economic area promoted by Russia or whether it would join the EU.
And large part of the Ukrainian population was very keen to join the EU. And that led to quite a clash, the Euromaidan conflict. And unfortunately, some external powers got involved in that. And it led to the resignation and exile of the then pro-Russian President Yanukovych. And this was followed by Russia annexing Crimea. Crimea there, you can see it. You can see it there, the Crimea, which was historically actually part of Russia, and the port of Sevastopol, also, which figures very prominently in Russian history on the Black Sea, as you can see. And this was followed by very rigorous and stringent sanctions by the West. Although there was a referendum in the Crimea in which 97% agreed to join Russia, and yet this was not recognized internationally, although the Kosovo referendum, I'm not very sure if Kosovo even had a referendum. Kosovo's independence was immediately recognized. Now, following, in parallel to this, I just want to discuss the issue of NATO expansion. Russia had been objecting to NATO's expansion ever since its independence. Its argument was that since the Cold War had ended, there was no real need now for NATO to expand eastwards, and the two sides should now live in peace and friendship. So these assurances were given to Russia that it would not expand, but they were very quickly belied. And in 1999, Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary were taken into NATO. And also in 1999, you would remember the bombing of Yugoslavia without any UN sanction or approval. And that led to the split up of Yugoslavia into 6 countries plus 1, Kosovo. Now, the Russians at that time had felt that this was also an action directed against them, because these were all countries that had been friendly to Russia, and Yugoslavia was a country which was friendly to Russia, and this was done without UN Security Council sanction. So there is a lot of merit in their argument that the rules-based order is one that is convenient to some countries and not to others. Russia followed it up with an invasion of Georgia, and it made its red lines very clear. In 2008, as you're aware, NATO opened its doors at the Bucharest summit to Georgia and to the Ukraine, and Russia again protested very strongly, and yet these objections were neither heard nor given any further traction by the West. Now, Russia's argument was that it is deleterious to their national security, with missiles and Western troops being located very close to its border. It objected to the treatment of the Russian-speaking population in the republics I just showed you here in the corner of Ukraine. In fact, these atrocities have been documented by the Western media also. So it had requested basically that Ukraine be declared as a neutral country, which should have been possible given that they had respected Finnish neutrality during the entirety of the Cold War. And to give him credit, President Zelensky of Ukraine did try to initiate and conclude peace negotiations with Russia. But unfortunately, some Ukrainian nationalists who are also called, who have definite racist and proto-fascist tendencies, they obstructed this process. And this finally led, very unfortunately, to Russia giving an ultimatum, amassing troops on the border, and then again being ignored, although everyone could see those troops. Nobody came forward to give any kind of security assurances to Russia. And then they launched this invasion. I'm not saying this to justify anything, but I'm just trying to give the background, because when you look at foreign policy, you have to look at every angle: internal foreign policy, the geopolitical issues, the economic issues, the technology issues, as somebody mentioned. So as you all know, this was followed by extremely stringent sanctions from the side of the West. And these comprised of travel bans, even more strict technology bans on the families of Russian VVIPs, technology sanctions, the cutting off of Russia from the global financial system, the prohibition of engaging in any kind of financial transaction with the Russians. and so on. I think that this should also be it should also be mentioned at this point that that the West also had many carve-outs in these sanctions. For example, Europe, the United Kingdom, even the US, which has banned the import of oil and gas from Russia, is continuing to import oil. In fact, there's a very famous quotation from our External Affairs Minister, which you've all heard of, that Europe imports more in a day than India imports in a whole month from Russia. And the enormous pressure that has been put on India to not sign any agreement with Russia, which is giving us a 35% discount on the highly inflated prices of oil, is really not in our national interest. So I would again request that our national interest be kept foremost. We are a poor country and we cannot really afford the luxury when other countries are not even following their own proscriptions. So prohibitions. Now, I'll just come very briefly to the military campaign, which would be very clear if you look at those maps. Initially, Russia attacked from the north and, of course, from the east, but it has rolled back its campaign against Kyiv. For the moment, we can't say where it's going to go because the situation is developing so fast every day. You hear a lot of, you see a lot of escalation on both sides, even as, accusations are hurled against each side of atrocities and a violation of human rights. So they are now apparently regrouping on the east, perhaps preparing for a major campaign to take the Donbas region, which is the eastern region. So they've already taken they're already in control of the Crimea. And so there's a land bridge now. If you remember the map, they now have the entire Azov Sea. Russia is surrounding the entire Azov Sea, and they will also get a land bridge to Crimea. They have got a land bridge to Crimea, so that is useful for them from the strategic point of view. This will also help in unblocking water supplies to Crimea, which Ukraine had blocked. Now, in terms of military targets, Russia had declared that they're targeting military infrastructure. And of course, there's been collateral damage, which there is in any war, which is highly regrettable. But on the whole, most analysts have concurred in the fact that Russia has not indiscriminately bombed cities and not targeted the civilian areas. As I said, there have been civilian casualties. Of course, Russia disputes even those. It says that a full investigation has to be carried out, for example, in the Bucha massacre, which yielded pictures of many bodies left behind. So they say that the timelines don't coincide. They had evacuated Bucha much before these atrocities took place, but I think we need to wait for a full independent inquiry into this before we come to any conclusions. However, having said that, I would just add that Mariupol, which is at a very important strategic point, where recently Russia says that it has gained control. There is a Azov Steel Works there, which has about 3,000 to 4,000 people still holed up inside. But a lot of these are comprised of the Azov Battalion, which is a proto-Nazi force there. And they have, in fact, according to the Russians, been using civilian population as human shields. And when they leave to get their supplies, they're fired upon and then they are touted as victims of the Russian campaign. In terms of military supplies, there's been no dearth of military supplies coming from the West. The US, in fact, I think Russia has just published a list of the supplies, but I didn't have time to look at it. But anti-tank defense mechanisms, loitering munitions, air defense systems, all have been supplied. Huge financial aid is being given. And of course, the sanctions are having a very strong effect on the Russian economy. They're putting up a brave face on it. They say their current account has increased, which it has because of the increase in the prices of oil and gas. But imports have collapsed, and that accounts for the current account surplus. And of course, items are in short supply in their area. Because I want to leave time for the questions, I'm going to go very quickly into the geopolitical scenario and speak a little bit about the implications for India. So just to mention very quickly that not all countries have joined the sanctions. In fact, the majority of the non-Western world has not. And basically because, no, it's not because there has been a racist undertone to the media coverage, as we all know. and people have noticed that the outrage is confined basically to victims in Europe. Iraq, Syria, Libya were almost completely, the victims there were at least completely ignored by the Western media. And there has been questioning on that front as to why a similar outrage was not displayed when these people were being targeted. However, there's been a huge victory. The West has shown a very united front, and the Americans at least have achieved the objective of greater defense burden sharing, which they've been pleading with Europe that you should also shoulder some of the burden of the military expenditure on NATO, etc. And now Germany has stepped up. It is, I think, 100 billion euros it has committed. It is committing to rearm itself, and it is. Of course, the German population is extremely exercised over there, so one understands where they're coming from. Although one article that I've seen has also warned about the militarization, of democracies. I mean, there is something to be said for that. Let us see where all this goes, but there is a lot of talk of remilitarization. Of course, the Europeans are going to now move away from Russian energy supplies, but that will take a little time. In terms of negatives, the imposition of these sanctions has shown to the world is that when the West stands united, it means the rest of us can be exiled from the global economic system. Our foreign exchange reserves can be frozen, which is what happened with $400 billion of Russian foreign exchange reserves. Technology flows, investment flows, information flows, because Russian news channels have been banned from all social media platforms. And so many other restrictions can be put on various countries. So this may actually spur movement away and contribute to deglobalization, which had started with the process of the US-China geotechnology race. And so this has created a lot of anxiety amongst many countries, which is not being voiced, but I hope that decision makers in India are at least paying attention to this, for the simple reason that we have also been the subject of sanctions after our nuclear explosions early on in the 60s and so on. So it's really important that we should pay attention to this phenomenon. And just add, you've mentioned Sitara, which is my little trust, which is short for Science and Technology and Advanced Science, Indigenous Technology and Advanced Research Accelerator. We have been working on this for a very long time, and we are doing Atmanirbharta before even the government thought of it. And this is the only way forward really for this. And I may also add that there was a move away from the dollar all this time, but this is going to probably now be accelerated, because you have the Russian and Chinese ruble yuan agreement. India is probably now going to go for a revival of the rupee ruble agreement. There are many currency swaps ongoing in the world. So there may be risk on this account, although again, it won't happen overnight. So these are at least the negative implications of this entire imbroglio. But the biggest negative, as has been mentioned already by you, is that Russia has been pushed into China's arms. If at some point, in fact, for a long time, we have been saying that the West has, by demonizing Russia, it has basically been slowly pushing it away, whereas it would have made sense after the end of the Cold War for Europe to be, reunited and, not reunited perhaps institutionally, but at least friends with Russia. The US also to be friends with Russia. And then I had been actually arguing for this when I was at the IDSA. And there were some signs through the reset that this could have happened, but somehow it didn't. And now that you've demonized Russia, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You've pushed it to take this step. And now I don't think there's any going back. There's no going back. It has been walled off from Europe. And I would be very interested in hearing Professor Nubel's views on this. So definitely, for India, it's a very difficult situation right now. We have excellent relations with the West, with the United States, as just been shown by the virtual summit that has taken place and the 2+2 dialogue. And we have a lot at stake there. At the same time, we have excellent relations with Russia. Not only in 1971, when they helped us with the ongoing genocide in Bangladesh, again on which the West kept completely silent. I remember I was a teenager at the time, and except for two reporters, of course, I didn't access the non-English speaking press, but two reporters in the world, one from the International Herald Tribune and the other one from the Times London. Not one media personality spoke up on behalf of the Bangladeshis and what was going on then. We have taken a neutral stance on the UN resolutions, although our abstention on the Human Rights Council has been seen as more of a act against Russia. But going forward, basically now we want to I think it is in our interest, I'll be frank, to have a multipolar world. We don't want just one power to have so much power that if we don't do its bidding, then we are cast out of the system completely. There's no real possibility of that happening right now, as we've seen. But it is a eventuality that we should prepare for mentally, at least. And for us, really, China is the main challenge. So what has happened with this is that you have resurrected an enemy of the past, of the 20th century, and put it center stage, whereas this century should have been about China. Are you making it about Russia? Which is counterproductive. It makes sense for the Europeans to do that, but not for us. And therefore, it is heartening to note that the Indo-US joint statement talks about retaining the focus on the Indo-Pacific. We should reinforce our Atmanirbhar Bharat campaign, and we should try to help the two sides come to some kind of agreement in which at least some basic security concerns of Russia should be respected, and then the world can perhaps limp back to normality. And then we should focus on the real challenges this century: climate change, China, and focus on our national interest. Again, I would plead that the main lesson from this is that we should deepen Atmanirbhar Bharat. And again, I'm so grateful to you for organizing this, Dr. Singh, and to the Vice Chancellor, to the Principal, to Dr. Hiremat for the excellent technical arrangements and for enabling the students and myself to have this wonderful interaction. I also look forward to questions and to hear Professor Nubel's point of view, because it is always good to have a counterfactual and point. Thank you. You're muted.
Really sorry. Madam, thank you very much for this very high profile and enlightening speech. Many of us would have taken their own conclusion, but for me, being a student of China studies, your conclusion was something which I was not expecting, but I really agree that the world, instead of taking on the real can I say they use monster, if you allow me, because I'm not a diplomat, we are just trying to focus too much of energy on a small country, Russia. Although geographically they are very big, they are very powerful, but here, as you mentioned, ma'am, different aspect, the sanctions, the military and resources, suddenly the whole West is united against one country. And nobody else is with it. Russia is fighting alone in this battle, although it's an aggressor right now. So for all of us here, students and my colleagues, it's up to us to take our conclusion, what Madam said diplomatically, again, not very clearly. And it was sometimes some of the issues were very hi-fi. Not all of us can understand, especially in terms of what West is supplying to Ukraine in terms of armament, So that is very hi-fi, which only experts can understand. Our Brigadier Rajkumar, he can help us in the end. But it's also useful, ma'am, that we can invite one European perspective from Mr. Philippe Nobel, that being a part of that region, and also he has spent a lot of time in China, helping China to become a normal country, right, sir? By training their journalists, by training their university professors, by making them Philippe, for me, is a global citizen. He knows a lot about India, about Indian culture, Indian cuisine, Indian yoga, than most of us in this audience, in this room. So this is something great that, we have got Philippe, that he's not unaware of India's national security interests. He knows that people in India need basic, petroleum and gases to run our country. So I don't think when Philippe is going to speak, he will simply speak on behalf of Gandhian and Buddha's value. He will also take care of our need for growth, our need for development. We also want to become a country like China, Atmanirbhar, self-dependent in terms of military technology, in terms of IT. So I think the time we are running a little late. So Philippe, sir, I have shared your introduction in my group. If you allow me, I'll just introduce you as one of the friend of India, and also friend of China for the last 20 years, helping Indians in China the way he can in getting established in China. So when I shifted to China in Peking University, I got the first intern at his news media. He runs a global media. So I'm very thankful to him for that. And today I request him that please try to make a balance that, what happened in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, in different countries, the way world media is focusing them. The very line Madam started today is that why Western media is so unbiased, why they are pushing India to fight with, take a stand, to just fight with Russia or go against Russia. You see the Wall Street Journal. I saw 20 articles for the last 20 days. Every day they're saying, oh, India is under pressure. India has to, go against Russia. All the English media is just saying one word, one line, it's coming from Washington, D.C., that India has to take a stand. As if we are not a free nation. We are a satellite of the United States. We are not Japan and South Korea. So, ma'am, with all of you, please allow me that I directly give the dais to Mr. Philip. Let him take his 10 minutes and guide us where India has gone wrong in the global perspective. Are we not, again, the same country of Gandhi and Buddha and going for the world peace and democracy? Are we becoming something like, very hard nation? Mr. Philip, dais is yours. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you very much. So I have a presentation, if we can bring it up. And while we're doing this, I want to say that, first of all, it's a great honor and privilege to be invited to speak here among such distinguished guests. And of course, I want to express special thanks to Dr. Singh. As he just disclosed, I've known him for over a decade from the times when we were sharing an office in Beijing. But I also want to thank all the organizers, the speakers, and of course the audience, because I hope we have time for questions, and I enjoy very much debate. So first, I would like to introduce myself and talk briefly about the organization I work for, because I think this is all relevant to our topic today. And maybe we can move to the next slide, please. So just to be very transparent about my background, I actually grew up in the former Soviet Union, first in Tashkent, which is now in Uzbekistan, and then also in Odessa, which is, as you probably all know by now, a Ukrainian port. So I wanted to share that because I think it's important to be transparent about how close that conflict is to my personal life and personal story. So even though I'm currently based in Berlin, I'm not German. And as Vinod also mentioned, I worked for 10 years in Beijing, also 1 year in Taiwan, and I'll be happy to talk about what I sort of see as Beijing and also Taipei's views on the conflict. So I would also like to mention very quickly Global Voices, which is the organization that I work for mostly. It is a community of volunteer writers and translators who cover global news from their perspective, from within their community. And we do this in over 40 languages. And this is something that I will also be detailing in the third part of my presentation today. So if we could move to the next slide. Yes, and one more. Thank you so much. So first, I'd like to review the main points that I would like to make today, and of course, engage in a dialogue with all of you. I think it's very important because we're really talking about a war. And when we're talking about a war in any region, in any country, emotions are, of course, very high. And I think it's a good approach to sort of look at the current war in terms of narratives, which means that this is how people wrap up facts, also misinformation, hopes, fears all together and create a narrative. And, you know, by describing a narrative, it doesn't necessarily mean that you support it. But I think that as we already all discussed here before, it's very important to understand how different nations relate to what is happening right now in Ukraine. So very quickly, I would like to first talk about the Eurocentric view. Again, to really describe it, which doesn't mean that, you know, I support everything in it, even though now I'm based in Europe, and then to precisely compare and contrast it with the Global South view, which of course, you know much more about. And I think that, you know, the whole question today, as we just heard, is precisely why is the Western media sort of so biased and so one-sided when covering different wars, not just this one. And we'll get to the issue, of course, of the treatment of refugees and the differences. And finally, to give you sort of a sample of what we've been doing at Global Voices to precisely sort of leverage that this balance and offer a much more inclusive and global view, because we are a nonprofit organization. So as a media, we operate very differently from the mainstream media, and we're truly international. I can tell you that in our newsroom, we have people from over 20 countries, including, of course, from South Asia, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh, who play a key role in precisely making editorial decisions on how we cover the news. So with that, we'll stay on this slide, and I just want to sort of maybe go through quickly some key points to maybe help you understand why we have this such Eurocentric view when you look at the conflict from that part of the world. So it was already mentioned before. I think the one point is, of course, something that you see a lot in the debate, whether it's the media or social media or local politics, and I won't spend too much time on this because it was already very well explained, is of course the military aspect of the conflict and the issue of NATO that was explained. One thing that I would like to say is that, again, from a Eurocentric perspective, what we now see is that even though NATO, I would argue, was not regarded as a very powerful, very well organized sort of force before the war, suddenly it has become extremely prominent. We discussed how the West has suddenly developed this united front. And just one piece of information that I think is important to notice is that, for example, Finland and Sweden, so two countries in Scandinavia who had this status of neutrality, which I think is also very relevant to the situation in India in terms of diplomacy, suddenly, within basically now 40 days, have decided that they will apply for NATO membership this summer. So this is happening and changing extremely fast. And you need to understand also that, again, to contrast that with the Russian view, because, a lot of what we're going to discuss today is also about identity, about historical memory and how people want to place themselves, let's say in the European or in the global context, is that Finland was part of Tsarist Russia. It was, when there was the Russian Empire. So for a Russian perspective, Finland is very close to their history. It has been part of Tsarist Russia territory. So this feels extremely close. And I think it's very important to, again, keep this in mind to understand both how Europe sees it and how, let's say, Russia sees this. I'm sure that I just want to mention it because it's a very important point in the debate, especially when you're looking at it from Ukraine, is there's this whole discussion about what is called closing the sky, which basically would mean, I'm no military expert, but ensuring that Russian bombs and missiles would not be able to sort of land on Ukrainian territory. And again, whether NATO should play a role on this and whether this could mean then, again, from a Eurocentric perspective, it's important to underline this, World War III would happen because, some argue that if NATO was to guarantee the safety of Ukrainian skies, they would have to shoot anything coming from Russia, which could include a plane. And then you would have a situation where basically NATO and Russia would be fighting an actual war. And the conclusion, again, from a Eurocentric perspective, is that that would lead to World War III. So that is, if you look at the coverage in Europe and Ukraine, but also in Russia, but that's a very prominent point to also keep in mind. Other things that I would like to describe, and I'm sure that you're aware of most of those things. There is, of course, a very big also debate on energy dependency. You probably know that most countries in Central Europe, and here I include, of course, Germany, depend highly on Russian natural gas. It's anything between 50 to sometimes 80% of the natural gas comes from Russia. And the winters are long in Central Europe. It's quite cold. So you really need a lot of heating, but of course it's also for the industry, for electricity. So that is also a political debate, because local politicians argue that if we, impose sanctions on the imports of Russian oil and gas, we will have to foot the bill. We might not have enough alternative resources. And so this is triggering, again, a lot of anxiety, again, from a very Eurocentric perspective. So this leads me to talk very quickly about the role of European political and economic elites. And I see here, a sort of double speech that I'm sure you have noticed as well. It's quite interesting. So on the one hand, until literally February 24th, the beginning of the war, most of the political and economic elites were very welcoming to Russia's money and market. So when I mean Russia's money, it's of course, the investment that Russia made. Many of the Russian oligarchs who, as you know, bought, real estate in London, in Paris, in Berlin, in Italy. We just mentioned, gas and electricity, but also Russia represents a very big market. It's 150 million people, so that's something very important. And then, so that's the sort of welcome to Russia. And the opposite of it is, as was already described, is the sort of sanctions. We are now at the 5th package being discussed of sanctions. So there is when you just sort of zoom out and look back, it's really interesting to see that on the one hand, yes to Russia, but also no to Russia. And that has been a game that has been played for decades by actually European political and economic elites. The next point I want to make is to talk about a region within Europe that I think is gaining a prominence in, of course, the debate. And this is Central Europe, and that I would include Germany, but also, former Warsaw Pact countries like the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, mostly. It's important to understand that from a Prague, let's say, perspective, what is happening now in Ukraine reminds a lot of people of, for example, the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968. So people, again, since we're talking about narratives, emotionally relate a lot to Ukraine. They feel that it's very close, not only in terms of geography, but also in terms of history. You also need to know that, for example, in the Czech Republic, which is a small country in terms of population, it's 10 million people, the biggest non-Czech community is the Ukrainian one. It's about 100,000 people. So this means that a lot of Czech people have interaction with Ukrainians, employ Ukrainians. Most of them are migrant workers. And again, it creates a very human, emotional link that, your colleagues, people you see at work, on the tram, in school, will tell you their personal stories. And that creates a very strong narrative that is important to know. And all of that, from the perspective of Central Europe, when looking at the history of Ukraine and Ukraine's desire to join NATO and the EU, again, resonates a lot because it's this sort of historical trend of going west in that sense and kind of, keeping distance from Russia. So again, I think that can help you understand why there is so much support in that part of the world. 2 more points before we get to the global views. One is about, the refugee situation. If you look at, the media, let's say in Berlin or in Prague, you will see that there's been an outpour of solidarity, both private, but also state initiatives. And this, again, this sort of welcome to Ukrainian refugees is a key element of the attitude, especially in Central Europe, but in Europe overall. Finally, I want to talk about the issue of Russophobia because it's important, it's sensitive, and it often plays into a lot of sort of extreme narratives on both sides. So, for example, the Czech Republic that has 100,000 Ukrainians also holds 50,000 Russian speakers, who might have different passports, but let's say who identify sometimes with Russia. There have been cases of Russophobia, but the flip side of Russophobia is that it's also been instrumentalized by Russian media, by the Russian government, and basically picking a few examples and blowing them up to kind of give the impression that, for example, if you speak Russian in Berlin, you'll be beaten up or things like that, which, I'm a native Russian speaker. I can tell you that that's absolutely not true. But again, this is a part of the narrative. So maybe we can move to the next slide. Sorry, no, the slide on global view. So that's the second one. Thank you so much. So here, I think that we have been presented with a lot of information already. I would like to make, a sort of overall introduction by saying definitely, I think that when you are in the global south, you have both an experience of distance and proximity with Russia and Ukraine. And so you see it from a very different position with different interests in mind and a different history. As I told you, I grew up in Tashkent where, we all went to watch Indian movies in our childhood. And I know that the relationship and the mutual image between the Soviet Union and India was extremely positive, and I would argue warm. And that is also, again, very important to understand why, as I was mentioned, when there is this sort of pseudo accusation of India, quote unquote, why are you silent? Why are you not reacting to the conflict? This is a typical Western question that precisely eliminates the very rich history between, let's say, the Soviet Union back then and now Russia and, for example, India, but it's also true for other countries in the global south. And so that, I think, is very important, but we mentioned that. I want to talk a little bit about China and Taiwan, because these are two countries that I know quite well. And I would argue that Beijing's position, first to talk about Beijing, has actually evolved. And I'm not sure that Russia and China are actually allies, in the sense that there is a tremendous level of distrust between both countries. And to speak more about China's perspective, I would argue that if China has a religion, it's GDP growth, because it's all about development, it's all about progress. And quite a few people here in this room know China and have been to China. And so from a Beijing perspective, when you look at what is happening in Russia, that because of the sanctions, but also because of the war that it has started, it is destroying its economy, that GDP growth is going down. Beijing perspective shifts from, okay, Russia is a political ally, and usually we have a united front on a lot of issues, but don't forget that also the Belt and Road Initiative, which is key to China's development and to global development, a lot of the transport hub goes through Russia, through the railway. So from a sort of Beijing perspective, what is happening in Russia is a disaster. And I'm talking here about economic disaster. And we have seen that the Chinese discourse within China, as you know, Chinese media is heavily censored, all state control within the People's Republic of China. And if the beginning of the war, there was completely alignment with Moscow view, we now see that the Chinese censorship has allowed for a more nuanced discourse. And China also has heavily invested in Ukraine, including in the military industry, and wants to have this Belt and Road Initiative and the new Silk Road kind of hub work. So suddenly Russia becomes a problem. And I think it's a big headache for Beijing because they're not sure how to move next. As you know, the war is going on every single day. People are dying on all sides, and there is no clear exit strategy, at least of today. So we expect this disruption to go for quite some time. Very briefly, I'll talk about Taiwan, because I think that from a Taipei perspective, of course, it's a bit of the David and Goliath fight. If you look at the map, if you compare the size of Russia and Ukraine, also the historical linguistic closeness, between Russia and Ukraine, there are, of course, different nations, different languages, but I don't speak Ukrainian, but I understand Ukrainian because I speak Russian. And for China and Taiwan, there is this proximity, but at the same time, there is this sort of political difference. All right. I think that two more points quickly, because I know we want to have time for questions. We already mentioned, I think, a little bit food safety. I think that this is absolutely essential. I will just give one example. If you look at Egypt, most of Egypt's imports of wheat come from two countries, Russia and Ukraine. So because of the sanctions in Russia, because of the war in Ukraine, we know as a fact that Egypt will be missing key imports of wheat that translate into bread, which, for most of the population is the staple food, like literally by the end of this year. No one has a solution. And you can imagine the repercussions of this in a country of, several dozens of millions of people who rely really on those imports. The final point I want to make is, of course, the treatment of refugees, as was already pointed out. It has taken extremely racist overtones across Europe, Western Europe, Central Europe, also the Caucasus, because literally, I don't know if you have seen those appalling statements, but we welcome refugees who have blonde hair and blue eyes. This has been literally stated by certain politicians, again, across Europe. And so suddenly, we have the good refugees and the bad or the invisible refugees. And as you know, Europe has been, has experienced the coming of people from Afghanistan, from Syria, from sub-Saharan Africa. And there's definitely a double standard also in the foreign students. And I'm sure you're very familiar with that because Ukraine had a lot of them, including from India, but also from Africa, who were stopped at the borders were trying to flee Ukraine. And that, I think, is a very important thing that we need to continue to focus on as journalists, to explain why there is this double treatment and why white refugees are treated differently from brown or black refugees or Muslim refugees, for example. And that, unfortunately, hasn't changed. So very quickly, the last slide, the slide number 3, which is basically our experience at Global Voices that I wanted to mention. If you go to our website, you will see that, as a global newsroom, we precisely want to have all the sides of the story and explain that, if the Eurocentric view is, oh, it's World War III and we have those nice refugees, that is just one very Eurocentric view. And we need to understand that the world is much more global. And has different interests, different hopes and fears about the conflict. So I mentioned, the treatment of refugees. We have written about this, the so-called silence, because caught in between. We have covered that for India and also, for example, very important region, as you can imagine, because of the political background, Venezuela or Cuba. It's also very important when we talk about Russia and the demonization of Russia as one term to, of course, make the difference between the Russian government, the Russian people who speak Russian, but don't necessarily identify as ethnic or political Russians, and the people in Russia, including journalists who oppose Putin's policies and have been now living in exile, and so covering from their perspective. We have also seen, for example, parallels between Ukrainians and Uyghur, or people in Myanmar. I was just yesterday, I was interviewing this very interesting blogger who his name is Wang Jixian. He's a Chinese citizen from the People's Republic of China, based in Odessa, the city where I grew up. And every day he posts his own views on how he understands the conflict and the war in Chinese for Chinese audiences. He's been partially censored, which is, again, very interesting, both inside China on WeChat, but also by YouTube. It's a long story, but you can find the story, and we'll be writing more about this. But I think, again, it's very important to see that there is a plurality of voices, and we need to represent and hear the different voices in this conflict. And to conclude, I think on the long term, when we look at the conflict from the global south, we need to focus on food safety and the balance of global power. So next slide, please. I just wanted to thank everyone again for this wonderful opportunity. This is contact information. You have the link to our Ukraine coverage, which is plurilingual. So we have now stories translated in about 12 languages. We also have a podcast where we sort of sum up and discuss those issues. And because we have students in the room, so I allow myself to sort of send an open invitation in case you would be interested in writing as a volunteer for Global Voices about India, about Indian views, about Indian perceptions on those issues, please feel free to do so. And thank you very much for your time and attention.
With me. Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you. Okay. Mr. Philip, what a wonderful and what a very pacifist and liberal view from Berlin and also from a different part of the world. As you said, you have grown in Odisha, which is at the center of the attack now. I'm sure my colleagues and my students have a lot of questions to ask you, but I have to take permission from Smita Madam, how much time she has right now. Smita,
I'll be very happy to, to listen to the questions.
Okay, ma'am. So I think there will be a lot of issues between Philip and Smita Madam also, because we got really two different perspectives. One perspective was kind of geostrategic and India's national interest, and Philip's perspective was Global Voices, global humanitarian. But he was also very balanced. He didn't choose any side, in this war. But all of us agree here that we are not in the favor of any war. We want peace, and that's why we have this negotiation. But in our room, there's a man of action who might have a lot of experience of war, Brigadier Rajkumar, and it's very important to get his final point for action. What is his take today on both the perspectives, and what is his view coming from background of Indian Army, combat, and the kind of, Ukraine, 45 million people giving fight to Russia. And Russia has to lose a lot of generals and changes army commander there back from Syria, a lot of loss of, tanks, equipments. So Brigadier, what's your take on Russia and Ukraine war? I mean, do you think that Ukraine will continue to fight, and give a hard time to Russia? Please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a rare honor and privilege to be among this august gathering of renowned academicians, luminaries, the generation next, the student of IR. Now, to start with, a soldier never talks about diplomacy. So there are two different fields, and we had diverse views. I would say the ambassador spoke very well about what the conflict is all about and the global perspective of Philip sir. Now, when you come to it, diplomacy, the soldiering starts where diplomacy ends, and I've never been towards that factor. But looking at the present condition, what's happening out there, I will not be comfortable if somebody is sitting outside my door to start with. So now, if somebody says is Russia is wrong or right, it is his personal views. But like when you compare to ourselves, if somebody is sitting at the neighboring a neighboring country, say Nepal, Sri Lanka, there. So what do? You mount a reaction. I would take a cue from an article a few days back in the Financial Expert by Colonel Rajinder Singh Kushwaha, who was a renowned defense analyst. He had quoted Pat Buchanan, who was in the White House communication director long back. In fact, he was one of the presidential candidates of the 2000. He wrote 99 in his book, A Republic and Not an Empire. He said, by moving NATO onto Russia's front porch, we have scheduled a 21st century confrontation. A man who wrote 99. And that time, that book basically said that the US should consider the internal affairs rather than intervening in others. Now here is a battle which has gone into 7 weeks. I think this is the 7th week on. And a quick collapse of Ukraine has not happened, in spite of Russia being a superpower. And what Dr. Vinod was talking about. There have been more than 40 cities been destroyed. millions of refugees. And undoubtedly that way, if you look at it, President Putin's attack on Ukraine is wrong. But the flip side, what has Zelensky done? He's fallen prey to USA or rather NATO countries. It has caused nothing but death and destruction. Now, what made Russia invade Ukraine? You started from there. It is undoubtedly clear that it was even he was forced to do it by the USA. Now, as far as the casualties are concerned, any battle of attrition, anywhere, you will have bound to have casualties. It is. I was talking to Dr. Hiramat in the morning. He said a soldier will be on duty all 24 hours. But you just need a split second when he's caught napping and then you take him on. So what I think where Russia went wrong in this whole thing, this whole campaign, which he thought that will finish off in 4 or 5 days, you need to physically occupy ground. It had all the armaments, it had enough troops to go on down. And fighting in built-up areas is a very different battle. And that is where the NATO countries, USA, have given enough kind of armor and ammunition to fire something from a height or somewhere behind a building is much easier than to have an organized. And now presently what Ukraine is fighting is not an organized war. It is just trying to survive. And admirably, if you ask me as a military person, I would say it's done a great job defending its country. Now, going ahead from here, what do you say? I mean, I would concentrate myself, where do we stand in between the two of them? India has been a forefront as a non-aligned movement, and I totally support what India's stand is there today. It is not that because I'm from the uniform, been serving the Indian Army and so the soldiers, and I like to support the government, is that we need to look after our own interests. And Russia, that way, if you all go back in 71, when the 7th Fleet was there in Malacca Straits, their posting out there could have been a different story, what happened in 71. So you never forget an old friend. That is number one. Number two is that any action taken at this time, it should be in the interest of our own country, our own fund. Now, if you look at it, in fact, the ambassador mentioned, in spite of all these sanctions, till date, even now, USA and NATO are drawing 43% of the oil and gas from Russia. So are these sanctions only for media? Next issue is the information warfare, which you mentioned. You find all details coming out from the West. There's nothing coming out from Russia. And if you ask me, if you gag the Russian media and now this time of social media, a small thing flares up like anything. What is happening out there? Geneva Convention. I mean, again, I'm cutting the whole story short. You only attack a soldier or a military establishment. Now, if the Ukraine army starts firing or takes in the garb of hiding inside the civil establishment and then firing out, and then some casualty occurs, you can't blame the other country. So if you look at that way, I feel at this point of time, Ukraine probably got seduced by USA, and that if I may be allowed to say that, and they thought that once Russia won the attack, the other country will come in. So if you look at now, a probability of a third world war, not possible. I mean, if you ask me that's my personal view, because USA has achieved what it wanted. It wanted to bleed Russia and it used Ukraine as a subject. Or I won't call it a USA or the NATO as an ally of Ukraine. Ukraine is fighting its own battle, being supported from behind. It is something like insurgency. You always have some adversary supporting them there. As far as there was a question between you and asked me about the military equipment. Probably the students may not need it. They have been supplied enough of suppliers. In fact, my knowledge is also as much as what comes out on social media or in the various websites out there. They have been given enough number of missiles, $1 million of ammunition. But that is immaterial. It is questions ultimately is as long as the supplies from West keep continuing, and as long as the battle is on, the casualties will keep occurring. And as the Madam Ambassador said, Russia is regrouping. We don't know exactly what the Russian general mind is. The casualties are there. It is there. They have not physically gone attack. They have just used the armaments to destroy weapons, and then, of course, to corner certain cities, the Mariupol, port city of Mariupol, or you come down Donbass, or you go up and now mentioned Odisha was there. Probably it is also trying to gauge how much intervention the US and the NATO was going to do it. So that could be the reason for regrouping. And Russia is not a country which can be pushed aside, if I may be allowed to say that. On as far as the India's context is concerned, what we should do now is that since we have a good equation with both sides, try and get them on a negotiation table, get them, and probably with the Prime Minister's kind of aura, what she got all about, we should try and get a stalemate as of now, and then look for something which is there. But any further escalation or further continuation of the thing, it's going to only create mass destructions, more casualties. Beyond that, I don't want to add anything.
Thank you, Brigadier. Am I audible? Thank you.
Very much, very much.
When I joined this conference, I was a little bit sympathetic that, Russia is wrong. I mean, Russia had an option to do it peacefully and in a different way. But after listening to Brigadier Sir, I think suddenly I'm rethinking that maybe Ukraine is not so innocent as we think in the Western media. The way Western media is showing Ukraine as a lamb, and Russia as a very dangerous bear. But in reality, what's happening on the ground is totally different. Only an army man can explain us better, and also our diplomats. So before I just add all my comments right now, I think this is a time for Q&A session. And as per agreement with the co-host, Bharti Madam, the University of Mysore, the most of the opportunity of asking questions will be given to our students, because all of us are connected. We can always interact on social media, but students have the first time opportunity to ask questions. So right now, allow me to ask one student from IR department. Her name is Haley. Is there, Haley, are you there? Yeah. So she will be putting her question to Smita Madam. In the row, first is Haley, then Vaishnavi, please be ready. Chandan, be ready. And any other student left. For the questions are directed to Ambassador Smita Purushottam. The mic is yours. Haley, please go ahead and be close to the microphone and introduce yourself a little bit.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Haley Chaudhary, and I am a student of International Relations first year. So my question is, ma'am, do you think is the time for India to reconsider its Russia dependence?
Thank you very much, for your question. I would say it is a little premature, but the sanctions are going to tighten around Russia, and especially if the campaign goes into even higher gear. So we have to watch how things develop. But this is definitely not the time, to give up, as the Brigadier said, on an old friend, and also corner it even more. So to the extent that we do not suffer, too much, we should continue. For example, 2 areas where we should engage is on oil, concessional oil, and also on the rupee-ruble swap arrangement, so that we can continue relations with Russia, and no other country should be allowed to dictate our interests. Because the minute, basically, we don't want to give up this relationship, but if we do that, it's clearly under the pressure of the international sanctions, which are getting more and more stringent every day. I hope I've answered your question.
Very, very important question. Thank you, Saheli. Thank you.
Very good question.
Yeah. Can I ask Vaishnavi to ask your question, please? Are you there?
Yeah.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, sir. My name is Vaishnavi Rajkumar, and I'm from the International Relations Department first year. Ma'am, my question is, will India gain economic advantage in Russian market?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Will India gain economic advantage in Russian market?
Yes, again, if we play our cards right, they could substitute a lot of, goods. For example, a lot of exports to Russia from the West have been stopped. So we could gain some advantage there. I was wondering whether our telecom industry could step up, because Ericsson, Nokia, Huawei even, I've heard, they're all leaving Russia. And we have some excellent telecom companies. So if they could get, some contracts in Russia, then that would be excellent. So definitely, I think that we could work on this I don't know how actively the government is looking at this. Perhaps, the fear of sanctions, because anyone who's undertaking any kind of economic relationship with Russia is now also experiencing secondary sanctions. So we have to be careful. We have to treat carefully, but at the same time, I think we should stake out our space and insist that this is our right to protect and promote our economic interests. We are not a country, which has the luxury to sacrifice our economic interests at the altar of other people's economic interests. For example, the West can do without most of Russian exports, except oil and gas, of course. But and they can perhaps also do without the Russian market, which is a fraction of the market of most multinationals. But in India cannot do that. We need to really protect our own interests. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Chandan next. Mr. Chandan. Both questions are very
Good
important.
afternoon, ma'am. I'm Chandan Vasu from first year International Relations Department, University of Mysore. Ma'am, I'm curious if India should, ma'am, not just India, South Asia as well as East Asia should ramp up its economic ties with Russia in their own interests, because most of the sanctions right now are coming from Europe as well as the West, ma'am. So I was just curious if the South Asia and East Asia should increase economic ties with Russia, ma'am.
Yes, actually, there is no institutional structure in South Asia which would allow us to take up such an initiative. We have SAARC, but Pakistan always plays, a very negative role there. However, on this particular issue, they may actually join, because Imran Khan has made a lot of pro-Russia statements, and he claims that he's been ousted because of that. But there's no institutional structure right now. East Asia is a very diverse area. As you know, South Korea and Japan are together with the West, and Japan has also joined in sanctions very heavily, although I think it is continuing to collaborate in the Sakhalin project. It has not stopped its investments there. So I don't see any possibility of any kind of joint action on this. Southeast Asia has its own interests. They have not yet joined the sanctions, but Singapore has. But again, I don't see any of these entities coming together to exploit this opportunity. China, of course, already has a very strong relationship with Russia. So
how about BRICS, ma'am?
BRICS, yes, BRICS has been basically a talk shop so far. But I think, as you can see, all the members of BRICS, none of the members of BRICS have joined in the sanctions. South Africa, India.
Ma'am, you're snatching my bread and butter. BRICS is doing very good.
Yes. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not very cognizant of BRICS and what it is doing. I mean, it has not had a very strong effect, mainly because China and India don't see eye to eye on so many issues, and India has a very strong relationship with both Russia and the US. So I'm not very sure where BRICS would go, but definitely now is the time for BRICS perhaps to take a united front. My only caveat there is, India and China getting together on an issue is not the best optics for us right now, apart from the fact that China did attack us in 2020 and a lot of our soldiers were killed. So I think that right now I would prefer that they could get together in, that's very interesting. Okay, I didn't know. I've just seen in the chat box that there is a payment system being worked out. I think that would be excellent. I wasn't aware of that. And that would be an excellent way to build an alternative system, for the simple reason, as I mentioned already, that a unipolar world is not in our interest. So even if China has a big role to play in an alternative payment system, after due examination and having a proper analysis of the full economic implications, we should consider some sort of alternative to the current dollar-dominated system.
All right, Mr. Basu, thank you so much. And one of the audience from Shanghai, he is in a lockdown, Mr. Sindhu, he is just updating. He is head of one of India's largest company based out of Shanghai, and he is giving update. Life is not very easy there. So thank you, Sindhuji, for updating us. Now we have one question from our chairperson itself, Bharti ma'am, for the ambassador ma'am. Can we give the mic to Bharti madam, please, if she is there?
Yes, sir. Sir, it's a great honor to have such a great personalities in this discussion. As an academician, always I will be in support of principle of neutrality, because we are believing in peace and coexistence, peaceful coexistence. And when it comes to the India's principles of neutrality, now as we are observing in a span of 15 days, I think India is having a virtual contact with 11 countries. It's a great moment for India to take a firm decision. But in this regard, I have a question. Madam, what will be the Indian strategy? Is it good to take in favor of Russia, or else in favor of Ukraine? Now we got to know, yes, when we heard Philip and Sir Brigadier, then we can say that Ukraine is also not innocent. Now, for Indian perspective, what will be the strategy? What will be the good for India to take in a strategy toward this issue? That is one thing, madam. And when Russia is facing plenty of sanctions from the worldwide, then what will be the Russian, position in the global trade or global economy, and how this crisis is going to affect on global trade? Will you think European Union will be in a great position in future, or India will be able to take or will be able to face this economic impact? India is also not in a superpower. India is trying to have a leading role by having the Atmanirbhar and all. My question is how India will face this economic crisis, and also is it okay for India to take in a firm stand in this situation?
Yes, excellent, absolutely excellent questions, and it's also these are existential questions for India. What are they going to do in the wake of the implications and the repercussions of the crisis? Definitely, we're going to suffer a lot, like most other countries, from high petrol and food prices, other disruptions, supply chain disruptions, etc. And I can not go any further than to commend the way our foreign policy establishment has handled this issue. They have not talked about so much about neutrality as judging every issue on its own merits, and they have abstained on the resolutions condemning Russia after giving an explanation of the vote why they've done that. On human right, on the issue of Russia's membership on the Human Rights Council, they abstained, and that was taken to be a position which is going against Russia. So we have signaled that on an issue-based foundation, we're going to tailor our foreign policy on that. But I think we've also made the point very clearly that we have an independent foreign policy, and as our External Affairs Minister has recently said, we are not on anybody's side. We're on our own side, and I think that's really the approach which should guide our entire policy. As far as the economic consequences are concerned, these are going to be very serious. And I have just seen a report that the EU is now going to ramp up the pressure on concluding a free trade agreement with India. Yes. Now, I'm all for having more competition in the Indian economy, and a free trade agreement by bringing down tariff and non-tariff barriers should be able to facilitate that, as long as it doesn't destroy our key industries. And there are some of them, I mean, we could perhaps have a session on that, but it would be too much. But right now, what worries me most is that these free trade agreements do not stay as trade agreements. They go into investment, they go into government procurement. After decades of corruption in our tendering system, and very partly, of course, due to Sitara's efforts, we have had the government make a lot of positive changes in India's procurement system, in which, at least the influence of foreign lobbies has been reduced. What has been happening is that a lot of the tenders have been skewed to favor foreign contractors because of the under-the-table, relationships they have with the Indian departments. And we've managed to have preferential policies now proactively acted upon. Now, if we bring government procurement, and India's government procurement, mind you, is $500 billion a year. I'm not an economist, but I think one of the reasons India stayed poor is that so many government contracts go abroad. If they'd been used in India, the multiplier effects of those contracts would have created a huge, economic surge in India. And we'll miss out on that if we bring government procurement. And in fact, we are going to, immediately after this, I've talked to a very wonderful academician, and she and I are going to work on this issue and write to the government of how the government procurement inclusion in a free trade agreement is going to damage India and damage Prime Minister's Atmanirbhar Bharat itself. So I hope that we will be heard on this issue, and it'll be wonderful if your university somehow could, maybe arrange a talk or something. I mean, I'm not saying that you should go in charge of international relations, but we need a lot of support on this. We are an unfunded small organization, and sometimes our letters to Prime Minister's office do have an impact. But if there was a mass movement, more people coming out in support of Atmanirbhar Bharat, it would really help our country. Thank you so much for your question. And thank you very much for inviting me and for organizing. I've been in touch with you for all the logistical issues, and it's very sweet of you and very kind of you to do all this. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. We are really very grateful to you. And in future also, we will be waiting and we will be looking towards to you to have such more events and discussions, because we need to know so many things, because, as the dramatic change is going on in the global politics, we need to know, as an expert in minds, they need to know how to take a firm decision, what is happening in the global politics. In this connection, really, we are very happy to see you, madam. And one more thing, sir, Director BRICS, Dr. Binod sir is there. And I wanted to have I wanted to ask Binod sir, then as, one of my students told, and the BRICS also is having a greater role in taking a step and helping. Maybe it is, I'm not sure about the BRICS and all. But the thing is that as an international organization, BRICS also is having a leading role. It has to take a step in this in this connection. And Philip sir, as an expert, a media expert, the way medias are pressurizing India to take an quick and immediate decision. Is it okay if India took a quick decision in this connection? Don't you think India will suffer in future if India is taking any firm decision or any step? Will it affect on India's position in the global politics?
All right. So before I give the dais to Philip sir, I just want to say that, ma'am, Sitara can open a regional chapter in Karnataka, which is the backbone of our defense industry. And as you mentioned, this data, 500 billion of contract going to Chinese and Russians. This is something why our country is so poor every year. So, ma'am, this is something touching my heart and most of my young friends here. And whatever direction you give us, although my institute is focused on connecting India to China, Russia, and different countries. But if we are not strong domestically, if we are not able to catch that technology coming from outside, if we don't have host here, then it's all waste, just talking. So on the ground, you have already made possible a lot of policy changes together with the Defense Secretary, Dr. Ajay Kumar, who is happened to be a common friend of ours and has got extension. So I think next time in Karnataka, if we have something, yes. Because I took him to China for a long industrial survey.
Okay.
So that was the connection, China connection was there. So, ma'am, really appreciate your time. And I don't have enough words to thank you here because you have guided us a lot. I'm giving the dial to Philip, sir, so that if Philip ji has any question, to our panels, our colleagues, he can also put in his question. So, Philip, sir, dial is yours. And first question is already from Bharti, madam. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the question. And again, it has been such a wonderful and rich debate. So I hope that Mysore University does more of those. And with Zoom technology, it's really important that we can actually connect globally, even if we can't travel physically because of visa, because of the pandemic, because of other issues. Thank you for your question. I think that as was discussed today, it's first of all, it's very important to explain India's position, interest to a global audience in multiple languages, because precisely this sort of pressured question of, why haven't you reacted within 24 hours is not leading anywhere. It's not useful. And precisely it denies, as I explained, the rich history that, the Soviet Union and then Russia, but also Ukraine has with India. Let's not forget Ukraine or Belarus, a country that we haven't spoken about, but is also, being dragged into that conflict. I really want to bring back this to the sort of human aspect of the war, because, I have a lot of friends who are Russian, who are still in Russia. A lot of them, journalists, activists, researchers, artists, IT people, are also trying to move out of Russia because of the sanction, because of the political situation. And there are very few countries now where you can go and especially fly out of Russia because of also the sanction, let's not forget, have been imposed on air travel. And I can't tell you how important it is to think about what will happen. One day this war will have to end. No one has the answer of when and how today. That's very clear. But one day the war will end. And then, both Ukraine and Russia and Belarus as well will have to be rebuilt politically, economically, humanly. So it is very important to have open corridors like, for example, India, like Serbia, like Central Asia, for people to be able to move, to rebuild their lives, to see something else, and to think about the future. And I think that in the future of all those countries, India definitely can play a very important role. Let's not also forget, all the thousands of students from India who study or studied in Belarus, in Ukraine, and who are still studying in Russia, and who can also create those bridges because they speak Russian, they understand also the local context. So I think that there's a very important role for India to play, and especially I think at the human level, because not forget that war is horrific. People are dying. People are becoming orphans, are becoming disabled, and this is very deep trauma that we will all have also to face. When we get to a more peaceful situation. So that would be my answer for now. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Philip. The next question is from a senior student of Masters, Alok Kumar. Are you there, Alok?
Yes, sir.
Please ask your question to whom? Mr. Philip, right?
Yeah.
Microphone, please.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alok, and I'm from second year student in IR department, Maharaja College. So my question is to Philip, sir. What is the role of Germany in Russia and Ukraine war? It stands with which country?
Thank you for this great question. As I said, I'm not German and I'm not a Germany expert, even though I'm based in Berlin. But of course, I follow the news, and also I have a lot of German friends, and including political analysts. And I think that this question is huge. It would probably require an entire session, because precisely Germany has been so close to Russia for so many years. And as I mentioned, is so dependent, let's say, on Russian gas. And that's why, for example, if you look at the discussions within the EU, to go quickly and to simplify, almost all countries now in Europe argue for a ban on Russian oil and gas. We can, agree or disagree that it's a bad or a good idea, but that's really how they're thinking. Really, the only country that is pushing back and saying, no, we still need to import Russian gas is Germany. Because as it was explained to me, the secret of German economy, the so-called German miracle, which again, we can discuss, is based on two things: German technology and very cheap energy resources. And when we say very cheap or affordable energy resources, we mean Russian oil and gas, again, simplifying. And so Germany, which also, as you know, had a change after, so many years of Chancellor Merkel position. And let's not forget that Chancellor Merkel grew up in East Germany. So she speaks Russian. She is very familiar with the Soviet and Russian sort of cultural and political background, and now she's gone. So Germany found itself at a very important change, and suddenly, this war that Russia started happened, and it's affecting things on, energy prices. It's the second biggest wave of refugees since, the Middle East crisis. So I would say that Germany is actually extremely divided. And I think that if you ask different Germans, you will get very different positions between either siding with Russia or actually siding with Ukraine. But it's important to understand that this topic has become a domestic debate within German politics and society, because again, it's so close and there are so many links, but also with Ukraine and also with Belarus, that it's become basically domestic politics. Thank you for this question. A very important.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
If you can share more about some articles in English about Germany's position, we'll be very grateful to you, Philip sir. Thank you so much. Yes. And the next question is from Pinal. Are you there ready, Pinal?
Yes, sir.
To whom? To Mr. Philip, right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I'm Pinal Trivedi. I'm studying in the Department of International Relations, Maharajas College, Mysore. My question is to Philip, sir. If Russia conquers Ukraine, what will happen to the foreign nationals living there?
Thank you for the question. I think that we can tell, when the war started, Putin, the president of Russia, stated very officially that they would take Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, within 48 hours. It's been 48 days, and Kiev is still standing and is under Ukraine control, has been damaged a little bit in the outskirts, but is still there. So I think that, again, I'm not a war expert or military expert, but when you start a war, you actually never know what will be the end game. And in terms of what I can say as a non-expert on the war, because I've been researching this issue a lot, we haven't discussed, for example, the role of Turkey, which is also very important in a multipolar world. And as you're probably aware, Turkey did provide military drones, Bayraktar, to the Ukraine army. And again, as a non-expert, but reading a lot of analysis and talking to experts, I understand that the Turkish military drones played a key role in actually stopping the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we're still at a very big question mark. As you know now, the Russian troops are going kind of regrouping in the east, because they, the goal is definitely to take fully Donetsk and Luhansk and maybe move to Odessa. But I think that if you ask even Russian military experts, no one can really tell who will win the war, how, and when. In terms of the second part of your question, I think that as far as I can tell, most of the foreign nationals residing, working, studying in Ukraine have left. But it's also important to know that we also have a foreign legion of military volunteers, literally from all over the world, Europe, but also Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, who are, because this is allowed by Ukrainian legislation, who fight on the side of the Ukrainian army, even though they're foreigners. So we see that, of course, most of them have left, but some are coming. And just as I mentioned earlier, and I think it's very important to remind again about Wang Jixian, this Chinese IT business person who doesn't have a media background, who lives in Odessa, and who talks about his Chinese experience of being there and what he sees. And he could have left. He could have left. The Chinese embassy also organized the evacuation of its citizens, but he made the choice of staying, because he feels that Ukraine is his second home, and he wants Chinese people to understand that there is a different story from the one that is, spread by Beijing within China. So at this point, a few embassies have also reopened in Kiev. A lot of the embassies moved first to Lviv in the west and to Poland. They're coming back. They're reopening. So it's kind of both ways. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, sir. I have one more question for Sweta, ma'am.
Go ahead.
Okay, okay. The ambassador is ready to take questions. Okay.
My question to you, ma'am, is sanctions have done tremendous damage to Russia's economy. Will that cause the populace there to rebel?
I can say, as Professor Nubel, made a full disclosure, I also stayed in Russia for 7 years in my childhood. And I learned a lot about its history and the heroic struggle that they have made, over the years against Napoleon, against Hitler. And the Russians have a tremendous staying power. In fact, their culture is extremely rich and beautiful. The ballet, the culture, the literature, world class, absolutely. Have influenced a lot of people and minds throughout the last decades. So I see a lot of resilience amongst them, and I don't see them, suddenly revolting. They're not, of course, as used as the West to, to the comforts of life, and the memory of, privation and deprivation is still quite fresh. So there will be, of course, pockets of dissatisfaction, but as you may have seen, there is a lot of unity also behind what the leadership, is doing. And also, the fact that such stringent sanctions and so much, how do you put it, anti-Russian feeling has surfaced around the world. It has united people behind their leadership. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Next question, and this is the last question from Marin. Please ask your question to whom. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meryl, and I'm a student of IR under University of Mysore. My question is for Philip, sir. So do you think European Union and Indian ties are in trouble? And if yes, how are we going to manage it?
Thank you for the question. I mean, obviously, I've been focusing more on Russia, Ukraine, and China. I do not see signals, at least from the European side, that, for example, India has been singled out as suddenly unfriendly or anything like that. I think that, as I explained again, there was a sort of Eurocentric impatience with expecting Delhi to sort of make statements, condemning Russia and siding with Ukraine, and of course that hasn't happened, and we know why. But I think in general that the European Union, to kind of bring it back to China, because this is the big concern also for the European Union, including with the Belt and Road Initiative, is that of course there are two giants in Asia, and one is India, the other is China. And so the European Union, I think, sort of fell in love with China for a very long period of time, for political, economic, also cultural reasons, and sort of was prioritizing, I would simplify and argue, China over India. But what we have seen, including with the treatment of the Uyghur population in Xinjiang, the sort of shutdown, the imposition because of COVID, the trade war, but also, on the flip side, the rising kind of revenue in China. China is no longer attractive as a market, as a place to put your factories, to import goods. And so I think that a lot of Europeans, and I can definitely say about Germans, because I've attended a few conferences, is that there is a sort of like rethinking about the dependency on China from a European side and saying, maybe we were too dependent on China. We need to kind of step back and look at other partners and other players. And they can be big ones like India, but they can also be smaller, for example, in the case of Asia, Asian nations like Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia. So I think that in that sense, if that answers your question, there is definitely a sort of rethinking of, maybe we went a bit too far with China. It's kind of difficult as a partner economically and politically. We need to revise this policy and engage more with our partners. That would be my answer. But thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meryl. And as a moderator, I would like to conclude that when the speakers are so scholarly, the role of moderator is so easy. So I love this role next time also. And especially in the sideline of chat, Madam is also responding, she's so multi-dynamic. She already took 3 questions and she replied to them. Philip, I hope you can also join the chat. Earlier it was a troll, not you. We thought it's you, trying to hack our system. So before I conclude and I ask my colleague to say thanks to you, even on the behalf of BRICS Institute, we would like to offer some good Indian tea to Philip if the cargo plane starts. And also, the best way to thank our speakers for their time is to give some remuneration, which my institute will definitely give. But I don't know which payment system is working. We have to make it clear. So from my heart, from my side, from my team, I think we welcome you to Delhi, Gurgaon anytime, and for a good cup of Chinese tea and Indian tea together. And I request right now, one of our senior students, Saheli, if you can give us a formal thanks to both our colleague from, although Madam is from India and Philip is right now in Berlin, but again, they are very far from Mysore. You have to invite them, okay? So please, Saheli, do the needful, and thank you everyone in the team for helping us. Thank you very much.
A very good afternoon to all. It's my pleasure to propose the vote of thanks for this event on behalf of my entire department. First and foremost, I thank Professor G. Hemant Kumar Sir, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Mysore, and Professor Anita Vimla Braggs Ma'am, Principal of Maharaja College, for their special presence. I take immense pleasure in extending my sincere thanks to our first panelist, Mrs. Smita Purushottam Ma'am, retired ambassador and the chairperson of Sitara, who despite of her busy schedule has found time to grace this event. I also like to express my heartfelt thanks to our second panelist, Mr. Philip Noble Sir, Managing Editor for Global Voices, for his valuable contribution. A very special thanks to Dr. Vinod Singh Sir, Director of BRICS India, for his constant support and guidance. I would also like to thank Brigadier and Rajkumar Sir for his presence. I also must give my gratitude to Dr. Bharati Harmath, Head of Department of International Relations, for giving us this opportunity. A special thanks to Dr. Chandranayaka Sir, Coordinator of IOE, for helping us in many ways. Last but not the least, I would like to thank the teaching faculty of our department, dignitaries, scholars, and students who have joined from all over the world, PhD scholar Vijay Kumar NC, technical team of the university, especially Manjunathan Sir, Alok Pathak, Chandan Vasu, Renuka Ma'am, Shankar, Milan, and the cameraman, and also the students of International Department for making this event a successful one. Before ending, let's pray that the war will end soon and we may find a peaceful solution to this world. Once again, thank you everyone for your attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Philip.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll meet soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you
Bye.
all. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you once again, sir. Physically and